Hello again, and welcome to the Stafford Connect podcast. I'm Tom Coen. On this episode, we're going to talk about local journalism in Stafford County. Why don't we start by stating the obvious? American trust in mass media is at an all-time low. In a 2023 Gallup poll indicated that only 32% of Americans say they trust the media, down from 72% in the 1970s. Of course, there are a lot of reasons for this distrust, not the least of which is the partisan reporting of the news. Activist journalism is a thing, and it's taken a toll on trust that the American public places on the media. In response to this distrust, there's a growing interest in independent journalism, meaning news media that is free from corporate and/or governmental influence. An offshoot of this trend towards independent journalism is what some are calling a movement to revitalize local journalism. An argument goes that local media news outlets are in a better position to report local news because they are restricting themselves to just that topic. Furthermore, their journalists live in the community that they're covering, which means that they can do it better than somebody from a larger organization from out of town. Advocates for local journalism would even go as far as to say that they are protecting democracy through their efforts. So on this episode, we've invited the managing editor from a recently organized local media source. He's going to sit down with us and discuss not only the local news landscape here in Stafford, but the role that independent media outlets have in covering those news. Joey LoMonaco is the managing editor of the Fredericksburg Free Press. He's lived and worked in our community for many years as a journalist. Many of you will remember him for his work with the Freelance Star as a sports reporter. But he's actually worked in a number of media outlets since graduating from the University of Mary Washington in 2013. Hi, Joey, and welcome to Stafford Connect.
Tom, thank you so much for having me on the show.
Oh, it's our pleasure. And what really perked this topic is how things have changed in local area and local news. So first, why don't you tell our audience a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get into the meat of the matter.
Sure. So my name is Joey LoMonaco, and I'm the managing editor of the Fredericksburg Free Press. So we're a nonprofit news organization. We're based in the city of Fredericksburg, but we cover the city, Stafford County, Spotsylvania County, King George and Caroline counties as well. Basically anything that comprises what's called Planning District 16. So it's those 5 localities. And we were founded 2 years ago when we launched and started publishing about 14 months ago now, February of last year. So yeah, we're having a lot of fun trying to, I don't want to say we're reinventing news coverage, but trying something different to better serve the community. It's a little bit of a pivot and it's a little bit of an experiment, but we're having a lot of fun with it.
Right. And before we get too far, and then we'll keep doing this, and hopefully we'll put it on the Facebook page. How do people find you after they hear all awesome stuff you're doing? How could anybody who's either listening to the podcast or watching us on Facebook get to find the Fredericksburg Free Press?
Yeah, so probably the easiest way is just our website is fredericksburgfreepress.com. And on the website, you can sign up for kind of instead of a printed paper, our main product is a daily newsletter. It lands in your inbox at 5 a.m. every morning. You can mute the notifications. But most people like it because you wake up and you get essentially the top headlines in the region. So you would go to fredericksburgfreepress.com and sign up for the newsletter. Just need to enter your email, no other information at that point. And we're also on socials such as Facebook. You can search Fredericksburg Free Press, Instagram, same kind of deal. And yeah, that's how we try to push our content out there.
And so you mentioned that sort of about the start, about the whole organization of it. But can you give us sort of like the history of it? What sort of made you all sort of try to create this? And why did you go the 501c3 aspect of it to try to move through?
So one thing that I've discovered is that the Free Press is kind of unique in the sense that we were not started by a founding editor. You get out in the nonprofit news space a lot, and you see a lot of these founding editors who are maybe solopreneurs, or maybe they started their site by themselves, and they've since gotten some freelance help. There was a group of community members, and they were concerned. really over the demise of the Freelance Star, the long time, once really well regarded daily newspaper that serves the region. I was a staff writer at the Freelance Star covering sports for 7.5 years. And I have nothing but fond memories of the Freelance Star. But under the remote ownership of Lee Enterprises, you could sort of see that stories weren't being told in the region. Local government, which having served as a supervisor, wasn't getting covered in the same way. People weren't aware. People talk about accountability in journalism. Well, before accountability needs to come awareness, right? And I don't even think there was that awareness of local civics. So I think that was the need that they identified. Seth Silber was one of these individuals. He's involved with the Fredericksburg Nationals. He is the co-chair of our board. Mitzi Brown is another. She's a co-chair of our board. So they were having talks and really just trying to galvanize community support. Is there the support there to support a nonprofit like this? You mentioned the 501c3. If you view journalism as a public good, something that serves the community, instead of trying to fight for this fractional ad revenue, like newspapers have struggled to do since the advent of the internet, let's try something different. Let's try doing it as a nonprofit. And that was the tack they took. And that's what we're going with.
And then how do people make donations, or how else besides, I guess, the nuances of how you're funded?
Yeah. So sustainability is kind of the buzzword in nonprofit news. You'll see entire conferences devoted to how to be sustainable as a nonprofit news outlet. Off the jump, they were able to garner a lot of buy-in from corporate donors. So if you see on our site, this is all disclosed. You'll see who basically gave the Free Press money: Mary Washington Healthcare, the Hirschler Law Firm, Hildrep. You'll see local business entities. That was the core of what I would say is some of the initial funding for the Free Press. They're referred to on our site as the founding corporate sponsors. But we also receive a lot of small donations, reader donations. So our newsletter, if you're signed up for the Free Press, you'll occasionally get what we call calls to action, which are essentially us hitting you up for money, like PBS, like NPR. And you can choose the amount that you want to give. It can be a recurring monthly donation, or it can be like a one-time thing. And then also on our site, there's a button, pretty prominently located to donate. So to answer your question, it's really about diversifying those revenue sources. So you get some corporate donations, you get some donations from high net worth individuals, which is a euphemism for rich people, I guess. And then there are grants specific to some work that we've applied for. I believe we've received at least one grant. And then it's basically converting your readers who can contribute into paid subscribers. So it's about diversifying those revenue sources. We started with a lot of, I guess you'd say, investment from local corporate entities, and we're trying to kind of broaden that pie.
Well, and one question you mentioned was about grants. So are these like foundation grants, or are they government grants, or what type of grants are we talking about? I ask because when I teach government, we always talk about grants and things from the feds or the state down to local.
So we have not received any government grants, nor do I think we've applied for any. A lot of them are that community foundation or that larger foundation model that we would be applying for. Sometimes they're specific to a project, or sometimes you're already doing a project and you say, and someone might identify a need. Ideally, organizations like ours have a grant writer or someone at least on the board who's dedicated to looking at these things. And they'd be like, oh, you're looking at, housing affordability and how, this model can help with that. Well, there's a grant for that kind of work. So you'd apply for that. And then sometimes, grants are just more general, and they're like micro grants. And a grant could be $500, right? It doesn't necessarily need to be some kind of massive sum of money. So what I would tell you generally is that they are foundation type grants. There are also organizations such as AJP, the American Journalism Project, that are, I don't want to call them angel investors, but they basically exist to build local journalism infrastructure. AJP, for example, you have to have a proven track record. They will, monitor you. They'll be like, you guys are doing good. But until you've been publishing for 3 or 5 or 10 years, they're not going to jump in with an investment. So that's like the big leagues in terms of like funding,
Okay.
getting that kind of buy-in.
And I remember way back a couple of years ago, I went to something, and that was my first exposure to that. You all were working at doing this, and I remember the people who were explaining it to me, making it very clear that there's like this line of demarcation between anybody who donates and the news and the other aspect of it. That it's the people who were interested in the first place, and then even if I were to make a donation and then I do something, it's not like you're going to give me preferential
Right.
coverage. That you were all like adamant that it was going to be, we wanted to be independent and not be, the other popular thing that you always had with print media, where if the one main business in the community gives money and does ads in the newspaper, do they get preference? And there's always that dilemma.
Right. So we refer to it as a firewall in our organization, and I'm definitely proud to say that it's held up 14 months in. So what I try to tell either donors or people on the board is that we're going to treat you like we treat everyone else. That doesn't mean like we mess up a story, you can't call me up angry. I'm gonna hear you out the same way I would hear out John Q. Public if I botched something while reporting about them. But it's right. We don't shy away from reporting on something, and we don't report on something at someone's behest. Conversely, and this is a small region. It's not to say that there's not at time when newsmakers are also involved in your organization. It's not to say it doesn't get awkward sometimes. But I think when everyone has mutual respect for that firewall, that's just kind of how we navigate it. Like, look, this is our mission. We have to do it. We certainly appreciate support, but we're not treating you any different than Tom Coen on the podcast.
And that's what I thought was really amazing when I first was hearing about your group, was like the commitment of people. Because then I knew some of them, and I would sort of ask them about it, and they're like, yeah, I believe we need news source, but I'm not getting involved. I'm just trying to help there be this outlet because it's a vital civic need to the community. So I thought that was just really something to really point out, that you all are very committed to that. You're also pushed or propose or advocates for nonpartisan. So how is that viewed in your organization?
Right. So I'm going to be totally candid. Like all of us editorially. So right now we have 3 full-time people on staff. Myself, Taft Coghill Jr., who was a longtime reporter at the Freelance Star as well, and a woman named Kathy Knotts, who has a kind of wealth of reporting experience in Maryland, Southwest Virginia, and elsewhere. She's been all over the place. And then we also have Jonathan Hunley, who is a Virginia media veteran. He's a contract reporter for us. And Bill Freeling does some business reporting for us. He was in economic development with the city, and then way back when he did business coverage for the Freelance Star. So collaboratively, like a lot of this was like learning what nonprofit news is for us, because it's something very different than, so-called legacy media, newspapers. You're producing stories, you're calling people, you're looking at documents, the form is the same a lot of the time, but the mission's a little different. So nonpartisanship to us means we do not support any candidate over any other candidate. We will never endorse candidates in a local or state or federal election. And we don't align explicitly with either of the major political parties. What nonpartisanship does not mean is that we never stake out a stance on any issue. So we don't currently do a lot of editorials or commentary. But if we did, for example, saying something about data center development that was either pro or con of data center development would not cross the line of nonpartisanship. Nor, I think a really good example right now is a focal point of our coverage has to do with the reverberations of these cuts to the federal workforce. We're covering those, of course, because this region is home to some of the most federal workers in the country. It matters to the Fredericksburg area. If you look at that through a particular lens, you might say, oh, that's anti-Trump. We are covering what affects our area. We are talking to the people affected. We are talking to all of our elected politicians of both parties about it. If the Trump administration was creating federal programs that were creating jobs in our area, we would be just as quick to jump on covering that. That's probably the best example maybe the most relevant example I could give of nonpartisanship.
Awesome. In local journalism, you had touched on this about the Freelance Star, but throughout the country, local journalism and small town papers have just been harmed by the internet and are just dwindling.
It's just everyone has been trying to figure out how to make it since the early aughts, and no one's really figured it out, right? I mean, there's been all these iterations, like the so-called pivot to video, right? Where you're, so much of your content now is videos trying to, jockey for that advertising revenue on Facebook. There have been various paywalls, various subscription models, and very few outlets, very few companies have figured out how to be profitable. And that is really, in my mind, what has fueled the demise of local journalism is they're getting bought up by, an increasingly smaller number of companies that own more properties as the years go on. And those companies aren't profitable. So, they're not investing. They're, in fact, cutting costs. And that often means losing reporters, losing editors. A lot of the jobs that I aspired to, like getting into the industry don't exist. I get to be an editor, but I also cover the Fredericksburg City Council, the Fredericksburg School Board. We had a murder downtown. The next week I was at Jay's Downtown Sports Lounge with the murder victim's younger brother. They were throwing back tequila shots, writing a feature about the kid's life and who that human was. So we're all wearing a bunch of hats in nonprofit media and, our fellow journalists who are still hanging around at newspapers. I think in a way it shows resilience, but it is reflective of the state of local journalism.
And so how do you all pick and choose what to cover and what to sort of focus on in general? I mean, because that's sort of one of the harder issues. If you're covering the school board and the supervisors and crimes and whatever, it's a lot of things perk up at different times.
That's a really good question, Tom.
I try.
So there's this feature we do, and I'm plugging a lot of the features we do.
That's great.
I guess that's kind of what I'm here for.
Yeah.
We do a feature called On the Agenda every Monday, and it's essentially a digest of every public meeting across the entire region that week. And we try to distill those agendas into bullet items of what are the most important votes, what are the most important information items. And then I encourage my reporters, including myself, to have a little kind of insider type paragraph below that, where you talk about, what has led to these issues. So I think that works on a couple of levels where it encourages reporters to interact with local politicians, call up a city council member, call up a school board member, be like, hey, what's jumping out at you? What do you think is going to be the hot ticket item on this? Having those organic conversations when you're not just trying to extract a story, but you're actually kind of building that relationship with a source, when you're not saying, hey, I need a quote for this. But to get back to your question, how we decide what to cover, the overarching commonality in what we cover, it's local. If there is a national story and it has no tie to, someone from Spotsylvania or someone from Bowling Green or someone from the city, you're not going to the Free Press for that, right? So you even see if you were to look back at our presidential coverage, it was always with a local tie. Anytime that there was, we were interviewing, local electoral boards about the role that they play. So we were, doing national issues, but through a local lens. And you see that now. Jonathan Hunley had a feature on a fired park ranger who worked in Fredericksburg. And I believe Kathy Dyson had a feature in the Freelance Star about her as well. Federal cuts are affecting people across the country, but, here's someone who lives in our backyard, and this is how they're affected. So when you get down to the granular level, the way we prioritize is we look at what meetings are on what nights. We look at the agendas, and then in our budget meetings, we have a budget meeting every morning at 10 or every Monday morning at 10. And they stretch really long because we're sort of doing that triage. All right. And the school board meeting, not much is going on. They might be talking about redistricting this one elementary school, but at the supervisors meeting, they're going to have a cage fight to the death. That sounds cooler. Hyperbole, obviously. But we basically make those judgment calls about, what might be a priority on a given week. And the cool thing about local government coverage in our area is all the meetings are streamed and archived. So while it's not, quite the same as being there staffing the meeting corporeally, you can hear everything.
Mm-hmm.
You can go back and replay it and write a story if you, are double booked on that night.
And that does make it a lot easier to do it. I know that some of the people, the Freelance Star, that's what they ended up having to do because they'd be in 2 locations
Right.
at a time. If you're talking about 5, 6 communities,
right? And
we're
we're all in a similar staffing boat. If you look at the Free Press, if you look at Marty Davis's outfit, the Fredericksburg Advance, and you look at the people left at the Freelance Star, we all have about 3 or 4 people. Which collectively, if you combined us, might not be an awful newsroom, but priority is the watchword. It's ruthless prioritization. I attended a conference and that was one of the panels because that's what you got to do.
Yes. So on the role of collaboration, what collaboration plays between the local journalists and then the public? For example, you're talking about on that one story, you went and saw the person and you're at the bar.
It was a celebration of life.
Yeah.
Really, it was interesting.
Right. So how much do you think that plays? I know you did sports before, which also is something that the Freelance Star has gotten narrower and narrower and narrower
right.
on. Forge had a basketball team that did really well, but there kept being articles about Riverbend, I think, in the Freelance Star, and my students were getting a little hurt because,
Right.
So what collaboration do you think, or do you feel is the best in that regard about dealing with the people that you work with as far as the community, and then what you all have to sort of pick and choose on?
So I think something that's really important is, like I mentioned, fostering those relationships when you're not just trying to get a story on that day, because then, people will come to you when something arises that's newsworthy. We really try to get out in the community and, be there at events. So I'll give you another example. A woman named Sabrina Johnson, who works for the Fredericksburg branch of the NAACP. She was, doing an informational campaign about a petroleum pipeline that runs under the Mayfield neighborhood in Fredericksburg. Mm-hmm. It's a historically black neighborhood. And the pipeline dates back to the 1960s. So it's not like the current city council or the current people in the city had anything to do with putting it there. But it fits that pattern of kind of like a historical kind of injustice. The poorer neighborhoods, the blacker neighborhoods get stuck with, that stuff. And I think what she found was a lot of the residents didn't even know it existed. They either weren't the original homeowners or, they just, the education, even though you get numb to those yellow signs that, warn you of it, they just become a part of your life. Mm-hmm. So she partnered up with the city's fire department and did a door-to-door awareness campaign with packets of information in English and Spanish. The city's fire department, they got their tanker trucks and their ambulances and I went with her on foot and canvassed with her. And I think that's important to have that kind of presence, so that you're using your senses to report, so that you have a little bit of skin in the game. And I think that also goes to living in the region that you report in too, because you care about it, essentially. So, when it comes to collaborating with the community, we try to take advantage of that at every opportunity.
Right. And that really plays a role in knowing, and that's when you go back to civics and governments, that plays a role too. If you're out there with the people, you understand what they're talking about more than if you just sort of pop in.
Right.
So if I say I'm a citizen journalist and or I'm a student in one of our schools that's interested in journalism, is there any way of tying in and helping with you all? Or
yeah, absolutely. So there are a few ways. I would encourage anyone who's interested in journalism, kind of regardless of pedigree or your existing training, reach out to us. And I'll drop this right now. I'll probably say it a couple more times. Newsroom@fredericksburgfreepress.com is our catch-all email address that all of our staffers get an email if you send it to newsroom@fredericksburgfreepress.com. So we have gotten messages from students. We do have an internship program. We currently have one intern apiece from Germanna Community College and from the University of Mary Washington. Those are rotational, and they work with the career services and the relevant departments at their schools. But we also have freelancers. So if you're really, really interested in high school drama, for example, like, your kid did it and, you really want to support that, through writing about it or for, doing photo galleries or whatever, that might be a need that we could use. And we might be able to try to provide you with some training. So I always encourage people who are interested in participating to reach out to us. Maybe it's as a, paid freelancer. Maybe down the road, you have story ideas that could lead to coverage.
And then I had a student who was a student of mine at Germana that was interested in doing something, and then I referred him to people at the Freelance Star, and he ended up getting a job at the Potomac News or Richmond Times, I forget which one.
Nice.
And which was really neat. He was all excited because of, he gave me the credit. I was like, no, you have to have the talent to do it. I just tell you who to talk to. I'm not, I'm a conduit. But that's great. Do you have, and if you don't, let me know and I'll do it, contacts with the, at least Stafford schools?
So, not in like the CTE realm,
Right.
like not in, getting students set up. So I would welcome that.
Okay.
Yeah. If after this we want to huddle and do that, that'd be
No,
awesome.
I'll take care of that, especially with the next year. And I mean, because we have a great number. In fact, it was one of my high school students also ended up writing articles for, I forget which source.
Nice.
And she ended up being a freelance person, and she didn't want to go into journalism as a career, but she was really just interested in doing things and being, active.
Well, let me tell you, that generation, I don't know if you call them Gen Alpha or whatever they are now, the kids in high school currently, that is an entire audience that even people like me in my 30s struggle to reach. I'm a media dinosaur as much as I try to stay up on best practices. So one trend you're seeing right now is the sort of influencer journalist or the creator journalist. So if you could marry people who have that social media following with someone who has journalism training, with someone who has journalism ethics and storytelling ability, you can reach people who would never read the Free Press in our newsletter, who would never go to fredericksburgfreepress.com, who might not even see a post we do on Facebook. So I really think that is something that's like avant-garde and that publications that, are trying to expand their audience are aware of, is potentially looping in younger people who can, essentially put their social media following to really good use journalistically.
Right. Okay. That's cool. I'll see what I can do on that way. So I guess one of the questions is looking towards the future. So how do you think you fit into the larger movement of journalism into the future, in not just locally, but even just your model into the future, even on a higher level?
So I'll say that 14 months in, we are sustainable. I certainly hope that we'll be able to hire another journalist in this calendar year. I don't know if that's a foregone conclusion, but I know it is very possible. And we are definitely, the thing that I am most heartened by is like the impact we're making. So impact is another big watchword in nonprofit journalism. And the way you can define it or measure it, it's really affecting, a change of the status quo, anything from like structural levels to like, say you write a story and a law gets passed as a result of it, or you're affecting the public conversation through your journalism, or you're just opening an individual or individual's perspective to something. You get an email from reader, hey, I had never heard of this before. Thank you so much for this story. That's an example of impact right there. And just the number of impacts that we have created since launching is just blows my mind, really. Especially since, when you're in legacy media, you don't even really think in terms of impact. You might think in terms of page views or clicks, or, winning an award as a journalist or something as sort of those measurables. But when you start thinking about it differently, and that's, I think, where the mission comes in of, serving the community, of informing the community, that was, that's a real mind, that was something that we definitely had to get over ourselves a little bit as journalists, from more of that, I guess you'd say, egocentric or, writer-centric mindset. So what bodes well for the future are those impacts that we're creating and the fact that we're still sustainable. We still do have support from those community power brokers that have supported us from the onset, and we're very grateful for that. I think that you're seeing us start to broaden our offerings. We have 2 podcasts. I have a podcast called Coffee Shop Talk. It's available on Spotify and iHeartRadio, also on our site. Bill Freeling has BizBeat Banter, which is essentially he sits down with local entrepreneurs and kind of tells their origin stories. So we're trying to broaden the types of things that we're doing. We have more plans for that in the future. So yeah, I feel really good about where we're headed. I tell people that when we started this, because of that, like 14 months ago or whatever, when we're hired, we were kind of in the newsroom on that first day, and we were kind of like, all right, what now? We had all covered various beats before. We had all been reporters, all been journalists. But in terms of, building a newsroom culture from the ground up, we were kind of faking it till we made it. And now I don't feel like we're really faking it anymore. So I think that's probably, from a vibe standpoint, what I feel best about.
Well, and we and I had talked before we started the podcast about how with the demise of local media, it sort of has shifted the paradigm of politics, that because people get the real venue for politics is you get national stuff, and it's
Right.
almost has nationalized all our elections down, even local ones, because people really aren't getting into the nuances of local stuff. And if you go on one of the social media sites, Joe Schmo from Kokomo could be posting something that he cares about, but then if you read it, you're only getting his take and his sort of slant. And what I've seen most often is people just say, "Oh, you're wonderful, you're wonderful, you're wonderful," and if they come back and say, "No, this is inaccurate," then they get attacked for it. It's not really an exchange of information,
Right.
and so we've sort of seen that happen locally, not just here, but across the country.
So I think that one thing that's really good about the revitalization of local media is it's anathema to some of that nationalization of politics, right? I cover city council meetings, and people are up in arms about 5 townhouses being built, right? They're not railing about Biden or Trump. They're not, trying to conflate inflation that has all of these forces that affect it. No, they're worried about the data center that's going in by Gary Melchers in Stafford, right? They're worried about the data center that's going in by the river in the city. In Spotsylvania County, it's just fun to listen to them talk. That hyper-local nature of it is the result of, that awareness that not only us at the Free Press, but, some of those other outlets, I think, are bringing back. For me, another pivot was like, I'm a feature writer by trade. One of my first jobs was at the Washington Post, and I was a news aide and a part-time sports writer there. And that's like the most like kind of, Hunter S. Thompson-esque, like, you're essentially new journalism. You're a storyteller first. Pivoting to, okay, this is a little bit more about education. This is a little bit more about awareness so that people can be empowered to know what's going on in their community. That's been really cool for me to kind of reinvent myself as a journalist personally. And I think you're seeing the effects in the community. Some of the other measurables that you can look to for, decreasing polarization locally, you're going to see more candidates in local elections. That's something that we are monitoring and will continue to monitor as, our publication, grows. A more diverse pool of candidates. You see voter turnout increase. Those are the sorts of things that are, the mission of the Free Press. And that's, I don't think you necessarily saw that in, traditional or legacy media.
Right, and it's sort of it is interesting when you're talking about different issues and how they perk along, and it's sort of what in Spotsy for years it was all about the solar farm,
Right.
but now you don't hear anything about the solar farm, and so it is interesting how
Someone visited it, and one of our reporters wrote a wonderful lead about sheep or something that, like, agri sharing, I think, is the system where the animals kind of tend the land by the solar farm. But you're right. You don't hear as much about it.
Right, and it's sort of interesting, and to a certain degree, it's sort of an interesting question about how, how much of that is that the regular media has diminished, or how much that people have become more over time more okay with what it is. It's sort of interesting, sort of what ifs, where are they now type of things. So so as we sort of end, head toward the end, do you see anything else besides podcasts? I mean, a lot of people are going to podcasts, including me, to try to bring out more local issues. Bridges across the river, or
I do have some other sorts of initiatives that we're interested in or actively planning or at various stages. Community forums. So let's say there is an issue like data centers. Compiling a panel of people on various sides of that issue, various stakeholders. Whether it be data center developers, people in the trades, environmentalists. Holding kind of community conversations on those types of issues. We did it a little bit last year. We held candidate forums for the Republicans and the Democrats who were primarying for the 7th district to replace Spanberger. And then we did one with the eventual candidates, Derek Anderson and Eugene Vindman, which, I mean, the ballroom at that Fredericksburg Convention Center, man, people were out. My arms were sore because me and Taft were just getting dolly after dolly of extra chairs out from storage because we were, staffing it or whatnot. And there had to be 450 people there. So the appetite for that sort of community engagement, and again, that's something different. That's not necessarily a story. We had a freelance reporter cover that forum, but actively staging that type of, environment with the community is something a little different. And it's something we want to do more of as time goes on.
Right. And so it's sort of, it's been a sad thing to see local journalism sort of wither. But it's nice that there's different avenues and different groups like your group is trying to make it flourish again in a different way that's more tangible and meaningful to people. That you're reaching out to different people, and it seems as though you're coming up with different ways to reach out to people.
We're trying to, and we're trying to be representative of the community we cover too. Our staff right now, Taft is a black man. We have a woman reporter on staff. You should be aware of what your community looks like, and your newsroom should kind of look like that too. One of the big knocks on traditional media is that, black people appeared in two sections, the sports section and the police blotter. And that's obviously the vestige of racism. How do you remedy that? Well, you get into black spaces, you hear those people's stories, you try to tell those people's stories, try to let them tell them. We're not perfect at that. I don't really think anyone's perfect at that, regardless of what the makeup of your thing is. But, I think being independent and not being beholden to, you talk about advertisers or donors or whatever, but just like a corporate structure in general, we can kind of set the agenda for what stories we want to tell. And, telling stories of people who, haven't necessarily been well served by media is a goal of ours. And what I would like to stress, what I stress to my people is that, we got to constantly take stock and take self-inventory of how we're doing. And if, like, man, we should have been on this, right? And adjust from there, because if we're not evolving, we're not serving the community. So that's something that I always try to emphasize, is like, be looking for angles, don't be complacent, because, that doesn't serve our readers best.
And our community is sort of ever changing, but weirdly so. And I mean that not as an insult to anybody.
Oh, no.
But we have our, people have been here for a while. So your Spotsies, your Caroline, your South Stafford,
right?
White. But then you also have the people that you're talking about that are government workers that are coming in. But then you also have other people coming down, and more younger people trying to go into the city as part of their rebirth and down in the city with more condos and type things that they're putting in all over. And so, but then it'll be interesting to see if they end up moving out to buy larger parcels once they have children. And so it's sort of interesting how it's sort of shifting. It's not being stagnant.
No, it really isn't being stagnant. It's funny that you mentioned that because you really do see sort of the one of the struggles we have as a publication is when to cover a story regionally. All right, when to say, okay, this is a regional story, it's affecting everyone, and when do we cover it a la carte or like as it pops up? Because I'll give you an example. Stafford, the city, and Spotsy, King George, they've all had discussions or built data centers are in the pipeline, whatever. But the tenor of those conversations in those localities is really different, right? In terms of the particulars, right? And the attitudes toward them. So that's an example. Data centers are an issue that we've tried to cover more a la carte as they pop up when doing regional commonality stories like, the JLARC report, how the state's role potentially in regulating data centers. And then there are other issues such as they come up in education where, okay, this is a regional story. The state standards of learning are changed, how schools are going to be accredited. So we might try to, do a more regional approach to that. So I think that you talk about the shifting demographics and, the old timers, people coming into the area, et cetera. I think that, with a hyper local focus on what's going on in, different parts while also saying, hey, we are a region. We are a planning district. There are things that tie us together. That's kind of our tack with that is look for how to do it, split up, but then also look for when it affects all of us.
Right. Well, that's interesting. And it also seems fitting that you have so many people that have been local for a while.
Right.
So that way they know the area, but they also have a vested interest in the area.
And all of us live in the area.
Right.
Jonathan lives in, I think he lives in Quantico, but he's a stone's throw from Stafford and he has lived in this area before. So, but again, that goes to, living in the region that you cover, because I cover the city schools. My daughter goes to, city school. She's a kindergartner at Hugh Mercer. So, obviously I care, you can be fair, but you're human. And I think it's a boon when journalists care about the subject matter that they cover. Not if they're biased or they have a rooting interest in one way or another, but if they care about it, if they're tied to the community, I think that only really, improves the coverage.
Right. And then there's a lot to be said for that. Over the years, I've seen that in action.
Right.
And it really does make a difference. It also gives you that, you were talking about going out and talking to people. Well, if you've been here, you know who to talk to or areas to
I've
talk
covered
to
stories in my, a street down from mine,
Yeah.
right? I've gone to I live fairly near the Dorothy Hart Community Center. I've covered multiple stories there in my time. And it's selfishly, it's nice when you can walk to an assignment also. But, it just goes to show, people will talk to you because you are a neighbor.
Yes. And that means a lot. So as a way to closing out, is there anything else that you think is important to sort of say about local news organizations like your own, as in don't compete against you or,
No,
kidding.
I feel like, when information gets out there, when people are empowered, the community wins. I want us to be, that's our mission is to do that. What I would tell people is to support us. If you can give monetarily, if you can $10 a month, that moves the needle. That might make it so we can buy a new microphone to do a new podcast that could focus on restaurants or something, right? Or it might make it so, hey, we have a little bit more freelance budget, so we weren't going to be able to send someone to this comprehensive plan, input session, but you know what? We got $175. We can send her a freelancer to it. So, while we want to be accessible to everyone, while there will never be a paywall blocking anyone from reading a story until they log in, give if you can, and support us in other ways if you can by amplifying our content. That would be kind of my pitch, if you will.
Right. And we usually end every show with asking our guests to tell us something nice about the area or Stafford or that sort of is special to you that you think makes us wonderful.
All right. Well, it'll be a little bit selfish, but here it goes. So kind of my origin story in journalism kind of owes itself to Stafford County. So I grew up in Woodbridge. I was a baseball player. I played baseball at Hilton High School. My senior year, we were pretty good. We made it to the district championship game. We made it to regionals. So in the Northwest region semifinals, so that's the game. If you win it, you get to the states, right? We played at Stafford High School. It wasn't great. I think we lost 9-3 or something. Tommy Harrison's first year, they made it all the way to like the state final or semifinal that year. Anyway, next day at school, I was disconsolate. Didn't want to be there. You know, you play high school sports. It's like your life's over when your career ends, when your season ends. So I was moping around school, and my coach saw me in the hallway. He was like, well, at least you got 2 paragraphs in the Freelance Star written about you. And I was like, what? I was like, what's the Freelance Star? So I go home or whatever, and someone had gotten a copy. I told my parents that I got a copy or something, and it's like, Joey LoMonaco went 2 for 4 for the Bulldogs. His double in the 4th inning cut the Stafford lead to 5-3. And I was like, damn, if those aren't the best 2 paragraphs I've ever seen in the English language, you know, ego's a powerful tool. And that kind of set me on a journey to, you know, being interested in sports writing, and being curious about it at least. And that happened right there, you know, at Stafford Senior High School, home of the Indians.
I know I had one of my basketball players was in the paper, so I emailed them through the school email. It was like, you're in the Freelance Star today on the front page in the picture. And so then I loved creating those moments for kids as a sports writer, predominantly covering high schools. You know, it's like a mini Christmas morning for them. It is, yeah. And that's another way of serving the community I love that aspect of it. Cool. Well, thank you, Joey, for being with us. And taking time out of your busy schedule.
Yeah.
And this is really important, which is why we thought it'd be an interesting topic, because give us your email, your website again.
Our website is fredericksburgfreepress.com. That's fredericksburgfreepress.com. And you can always contact us at newsroom@fredericksburgfreepress.com. We will get your email. I read every email. I would say I respond to 99.8. If you send a non-venomous email, I will reply to you, and I will engage with you.
Good. Thank you, Joey. And thank you for what you're doing. As I said, I heard about this a couple of years ago during the campaign, and it just sort of sat dormant in the back of my head. And then when we were talking, it just seems really, I'll use a fancy term, prescient to what's going on, because you're giving us a lot more information on our community, and we appreciate that. So thank you again.
No, thank you for thinking of us, and thank you for having me on the show.
No, thank you, sir. Thank you again, Joey, for sharing your time and your insights with us. Who better to help us understand local media, its landscape, and how it's changing than somebody who has worked in it for years? And it's really important that we have a local media outlets that will give us local information. To get only your own local information from social media sites means you're not getting the whole story. You're often getting skewed information. So the more sources you go to, the more informed you'll be. And I want to thank you as well for joining us on our episode. We do appreciate you and hope you'll refer us to all your friends. And again, while we're on the subject of friends, we want to thank our friends at Tilly's Ice Cream for their kind donations to the program. Tilly's is located at the Ferry Farm Shopping Center at 215 Kings Highway. Next time you're in the mood for ice cream and in the area, stop by and treat yourself. You'll be glad you did. And our next episode, we'll have some students who are graduating, and they have attended state competitions. One from Stafford, and their drama department competition, they won states, and one from Colonial Forge on the basketball team who went to states. So we can understand different things that high schoolers are going through, as well as these high-level competitions. Until then, I'm Tom Coen, and you're listening to the Stafford Connect podcast. Stafford Connect is a River's Edge Media original podcast. You can listen to the show anywhere you get your podcast, or catch us on YouTube and watch the video. Stafford Connect, the conversation begins here.